Hi, my name is Mary Beth Lee, and I'm here with my colleague, Jen Coldy. We are both analysts at the Vertex project. For today's What's New webinar, we'll be discussing story templates, which you can use to help streamline your reporting. So what we'll do today is we'll talk a little bit about what Synapse is, just for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Synapse or with the Vertex project. We'll also go through a brief overview of the stories tool, which we covered in a previous webinar. And then we're going to talk a little bit about story templates, tell you what they are and how you can use them. Finally, we're going to go through two examples of using story templates for reporting. The first one is going to be using a story template to generate a phishing report. And for the other one, we're going to use a story template to generate threat actor profiles. So first, let's go over Synapse, just for those of you who may be unfamiliar. Synapse is a versatile central intelligence system that the Vertex project created to help support analyst teams throughout every stage of the intelligence lifecycle. With Synapse, you're able to fuse interdisciplinary data, platforms, and teams into a single system to help facilitate collaborative analysis. And so with that, let's go over and switch into Synapse. This is our Synapse instance. Right now, I'm in the Stories tool. We previously discussed the Stories tool in a webinar, which I think Erica will be kind enough to drop the link into the chat. We also have a recording of that webinar that should be available on our website if you'd like to go see it for some additional information. So basically what stories are is Synapse's native reporting tool that you can use to showcase your findings, whether it's internally or externally. This right here is an example of a story that we did previously in response to a research request following the US Department of Justice's indictment of some GRU officers. One of the things that stories allows you to do is to pair prose with data. In this case, we have our prose here. We have a little write-up of our findings. Synapse supports Markdown, which we're able to use in this element here. You can also use stories to showcase some photos, like we have this wanted poster that was published along with the indictment. However, what's probably most powerful about stories is that you have the ability to display data. I don't know why that's not showing right here. You can showcase different data in any data that you have within Synapse, you're able to showcase in stories. You can showcase data in different views, whether it's our geospatial view. We can also have stats view if that's probably the way that's most important for you to showcase through a table or through a chart. You can also have tabular view like we have right here. Or you can also use force graph view if that's the best way to display your data. This is an example of data that we have in our tabular view. One of the things that is probably the most powerful about displaying data through stories is that when you show your findings in stories, you're able to import directly into stories rather than having to go and export your data out of Synapse and into an external application, whether it's Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or something like that. And what that means is that you're able to make sure that you're showcasing the latest data that you have. For example, for our data here, if we make any changes to the data that we have in Synapse that's related to this campaign data that we're showcasing, and we want to make sure that we have that updated data in our story, we can always go and we can just refresh the nodes and it will go run that query again and pull in the latest nodes from Synapse so we can make sure that the changes that we have in our database is reflected in the story that we're publishing. We can always make sure that we have the latest data. Stories are a highly collaborative tool that's possible if I'm working with another analyst on this, if I want to give them either admin privs, if I really trust them, or editor privs, or if I just want to give them the ability to view the story. There's multiple different ways that you can share with other users. You can also use stories to leave comments. So if you're doing a review for someone and you notice that there's maybe an issue with their story template, something that they're missing a word, or you want to leave them a notification that like, hey, there's a typo here, you can leave them a comment and the analyst can go and they can respond to that comment, they can close it. It's a pretty easy way to handle peer review. Finally, when you're ready to share your story, you can either share it internally by adjusting the settings that we talked about, or you can go and you can export it as a PDF and then you can share it with an external user who doesn't have access to your Cortex. So when we made stories, we decided to enact several different updates that make it a little bit easier for teams to use stories, particularly those that are using stories to do reporting that follows a standardized format, or teams that might be doing reports that follow very specific styles, a similar style. So to give you an example of what this might look like, let's pretend that I am an IT department and I tend to do a lot of research into phishing emails that are hitting our users. And I send out reports saying like, hey, this is a phishing campaign that we've seen. This is what the email looks like. This is what the subject line is. If you see it, don't click on it. So let's pretend that I've been researching this one campaign, and these are all of these emails that I've found and I've been modeling, and there's 114 of them so far. It's a pretty busy campaign, so I want to let my users know, hey, we're seeing a lot of this. If you see this email, please don't click on it. What you might notice here in my query is that I lifted these INET email message nodes by using a tag. If you're familiar with our work, you'll know that we use tags for a couple different reasons. We use them to label data. We use them to note if there's a assessment, either an assessment that we've made or a third-party assessment. And then we also can use them as a way to organize our research, which I'm doing in this case. All of my research that's related to this specific campaign, I'm organizing under this VTX story apple cider tag, just so it's an easy way for me to lift that data and keep track of it. So there's some information that I want to share with my users that is pretty similar to what I share with my other phishing alerts. This will be information like header information. I want to definitely show them this is the subject line of this email so they know what to look out for. I also tend to show them the information about the email attachments. In this case, it's this email attachment that goes by this name, Iran, North Korea, Russia, with this date. Just so if they see any of this information, they know this is the email that you should be looking out for. If it hits your inbox, please don't click on it. Please don't open anything. So I have all my data. I'm going to go back over to the stories tool. Because my team frequently does these phishing alerts, we decided that the best way to make our lives a little easier was to create a phishing template. So this is the template that I have. It has a couple different elements. It has a title that I can go ahead and adjust the actual title when I'm ready to publish my particular story. It has this text that we usually include that says like, hey, this is spear phishing alert or a phishing email campaign that we've seen. We just want to share information about it. And then it has a couple different elements that include data that we typically will send out. And now each of these elements are designed to have a query that they'll run. So for example, this email header element, it's going to run this query that I can actually go and edit in here if I'd like to, where it will lift the INET email header node by the story tag. And you can see that I'm using actually a variable here, which is one of the changes that we made for our templates. And in this case, it lets me switch out information pretty easily since I can just change whatever the story tag is. And you can make your queries and you can make your variables as simple or as complex as you'd like. In my case here, it's pretty simple. So to give you a sense of how I would use this, let's go back out of the story. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. And here is my copy that I can use for my alert. I'm going to retitle it so that I can keep track of it. And my work in progress title will just be the same as the story that I'm using, my apple cider story. So I have my template. Now I want to put my data in it. So I'm going to go ahead over to the story settings, and I'm going to change the variable. So I'm going to set the variable to my apple cider tag and save it. And then I'm going to use that variable to go ahead and populate everything in my story. So I'm going to refresh all my element queries, and we can see the data populate. So at this point, I'm just going to go and scan through and make sure that I see all of my data is there. Everything's correct. If I want to reorder that so that you can see the sender, you can see the subject line. If I want to resize anything, I could do that here. Here's the attachment that I wanted. Here's the URL that the attachment will try and download something else from. And then here's my targeting data that I was able to find. Let's pretend that my IT department is for a Ministry of Foreign Service or Foreign Affairs rather. And here's the locations that all of the targeted entities are in. Public reporting in case my users want to know a little bit more about public reporting about this. And then my little blurb about, like, again, this is a notice from the IT department. Please don't click on it if you see anything. And this is what it will look like if it's out of edit mode and it's in my resender final mode. I will need to go and redo the title. Having the ability to copy query or to copy templates and to switch in and out data using the variables makes it really easy for us to go and publish different reports. For me, if I'm sending out a report about this specific alert, and then if I have another alert that I have to do about another phishing email, I can just easily go and reset the variable so that I can repopulate with the new data and showcase the other information. Like, let's say that my other research that I was doing was using a pumpkin spice tag. I can just switch that data in and out pretty easily by resetting the variable. Let's go reset that, and then we'll run all the queries again. And they went ahead and refreshed. So this is for the other alert that I'll have to send out. I'll go and reorder these so that they'll show the date first and then the sender. So this is a different campaign that we saw that we'll have to send an email out for. This is the attachment that it's delivering. This is the URL. Having those, it makes it really easy to go and create different alerts that I can send out. It takes me, not very long at all. So this is an easy way to showcase some research that we found. I basically just had to copy the story and then go and redo the variable. To give you an example of some other really cool things that we can do with templates, I'm going to pass it off to the Silence, or to Jen Cooldy, as you might know her. And she's going to go and show us some ways that we can use templates to go and create threat actor profiles. And I'm going to stop sharing.
I think I just took over from you. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. Thank you, Mary Beth. Awesome intro to stories and story templates. I want to talk about a separate use case for stories, similar, but a slightly different one. What I want to talk about is threat group profiles. Now, if we're all tracking threat intelligence and wanting to keep tabs on who's doing things and what their TTPs are and who they're attacking and so on, this is a common type of report that many organizations would need to produce. And this can range from anything such as a public report, like maybe this is your company's latest white paper on a group that you've been tracking and researching for some time. Maybe it's something more internally focused. It's a summary report for upper management because they've asked for information about a particular group that they're hearing more about and they want to be kept reasonably well informed. Maybe it's an internal report for your SOC team or your incident response team who's encountering this group through some alert or through some incident that they're dealing with, and they need to know detailed information about the threat group to know how best to respond to them. So lots of different reasons why you might want a threat group report. And depending on the type of report you're being asked to generate, this is typically something that might take a team of analysts anywhere from a few days to a few weeks to potentially even a few months to produce, right? If you're going to put out that super whiz bang white paper for your company, then that's going to be a much more detailed product and can literally take months to produce. What a template allows you to do is give you ready access to at least some of that data within Synapse, because Synapse's strength, or one of its many strengths, is the fact that it can store your data related to incidents, threat groups, malware families, assets, vulnerabilities, whatever you're tracking. It stores that data in a structured manner, which allows you to easily ask questions about that data to quickly get answers. Synapse also allows you to structurally record your analytical assessments or observations. So for us, this is things like tags. We use tags to indicate that a particular IOC, for example, is associated with a specific threat group or a specific malware family, or is representing the use of a particular TTP in terms of how it's being leveraged. So all of this data is stored in Synapse, and because it's structured, you can use Synapse in the Storm query language to ask about it. So as Mary Beth indicated, you can make these elements of your template or your report into little elements that are generated by a Storm query. So if there's a question you want to answer, You make that into an element, you run the storm query, you get that data back. You can do this for threat groups just as you can for incidents or for email phishing attacks, for example. So this is a threat group template that we've put together. You can see, similar to the one that Mary Beth showed you, we have a title at the top. We have an introductory paragraph where you can add some type of overview for the group as kind of an introduction. We have some stats that will get populated about the group, including the type of group that it is, the dates when we've seen them operate, summary of the numbers and different types of indicators that we may have for that group. And then a number of other things that we may choose to populate. And there's a lot of different stuff that we might want to put into a threat group report, depending on our audience. So these elements show some kind of high level elements that we may want to put in. Are there aliases for this group, for example? Very common in our industry for different organizations to use different names to refer to the same group. So what other names is this group known by? We have a MITRE attack plugin that works with Synapse. It's one of our free, not plugin, power-up. It's one of our free power-ups, and it allows you to pull the MITRE attack matrix into Synapse as data that you can then query and cross-reference. So maybe for my threat group report, I want to add in information from MITRE. So what are the software families, the malware families that this group uses according to the MITRE attack matrix? What are the techniques that this group uses according to the MITRE attack matrix? I can also pull that same information in from public reporting if there's OSINT that I'm tracking and modeling within Synapse. I can include things like targeting information. Do we know which countries or which parts of the globe this group tends to focus on? Industry targeting, and so on. So some of these elements that we can potentially add, you can see I have templated in the report currently. We have a number of other potential items that I can include that are parked over here in the clipboard on the side, but I can add in things like exploits, related public reporting. If I want to include detailed indicator lists, I have all of these different elements that execute a storm query to retrieve and add that data to my report. So to show you briefly what that looks like, just in terms of how these are actually embedded storm queries that we can edit and modify. This is the query that I would execute to pull in other names, other aliases for this group based on the MITRE attack data. So in this case, the basis of my report, or the thing that I'm going to ask about, the thing that's going to be the variable in my report, is the threat group name. I leverage that as part of a tag that we use internally to keep track of things attributed to that group. I use that tag to pivot into the MITRE attack matrix because we've downloaded that data into Synapse from MITRE's Git repo, and then look up any aliases that MITRE knows about that are associated with that group. Now that's a little bit more complicated query than the one that Mary Beth demonstrated, but still pretty straightforward from a storm standpoint. But the nice thing about embedding these queries in a report is you only have to write them once. So as an analyst, maybe I personally don't know how to write that specific query, but my genius colleague, Mary Beth, does, and she's put it in this template for me. So now I can simply leverage the template to execute those queries. So to show you how this would work, I'm going to go out and copy that report. So here's my copy. And let's say I've just been asked by my boss about some new threat group that he's read about called Sparkling Goblin. And I have no idea who Sparkling Goblin is. There's too many threat groups out there for me to keep track of, but I've been asked for information about this group. Now, hopefully, or probably, if you're doing threat intel, you are pulling in public reporting from other organizations because none of us can do it all. So it's very helpful to keep track of what other people are reporting on. So it's possible that someone else on my team has already ingested information about this threat group that I can leverage. So if there is information in Synapse, I can simply go into my story settings and say, hey, the threat that I want to learn about, I always pick the long names that are hard to type, but I want to learn about Sparkling Goblin, save that as my variable, my input to the story, and then just like Mary Beth showed you, refresh all my queries. And you can see the information is updating here. You see some little spinny things happening off to the side where those queries are being refreshed. So that's kind of a nice thing to point out, is the different elements that I can potentially add to my story don't actually have to be in the current layout. Even if they're parked over here in the clipboard, they will still refresh and update when I run that command, and then I can add them in, swap those elements out, however I choose, based on my audience and what I want to include in my final report. But we can see that after running those queries and updating my template, my overview has been populated for me, and it tells me we do know about Sparkling Goblins, so I will have some information to give back to my boss. But it's written me a sentence. The Sparkling Goblin Threat Group is a nation-state group based in or operating on behalf of China. They have operated since at least 2020. Now, where did that information come from? Synapse actually wrote that sentence for me. So I actually, for these first two elements, have a storm query that calls a macro, which is more stored storm. In this case, it takes my threat group name, and it calls a macro that I've stored over here. This macro sets some variables, the threat name, the type of activity, the country that they may be coming from, their first known date of activity, and executes some storm to pull that data from within Synapse, populates that sentence, kind of like doing Mad Libs, and then writes that sentence for me and adds it to my story. So depending on how fancy you want to get, you can actually have Synapse write your report for you. Similarly, it's populated these stats, some kind of summary information about that group, dates of operation, counts of indicators that we have for this group. They're fairly new. Our first known activity is 2020. The reporting that we have on this group is from August of 2021. So we don't have a ton of information, but we were able to pull some data from Synapse. If we scroll down, you can see some of these elements have been populated. And I can go through and decide which of these elements are useful for my purposes, again, depending on my audiences, the data that I have available to me. In this case, these MITRE attack nodes did not get populated. MITRE doesn't know about a group currently called Sparkling Goblin, so any of these MITRE elements may not be useful for my final report. I can simply remove them, send them back to the clipboard if I don't want them present in my final layout. So I'm going to flip over and show you a prettified report, one that I've actually gone through and cleaned up to produce a final report. We have our overview, we have our summary with our stats data. We have information about aliases. This group is apparently also known as Earth Baku, another group that I'm not familiar with. They use a piece of malware called Sidewalk. Based on the targeting information we have, they've hit United States and Canada, as well as some countries in the Middle East and the Far East. Scrolling down, we have public reporting associated with the group. Again, these are just the different elements that I've populated. We have some information about IP addresses, not a ton of data, but at least we've got some. So again, showing how those elements can be copied and pasted. Sorry, not copied and pasted. Thank you, Steve Miller. Can be automatically populated, so you don't have to copy and paste. But I can swap these different elements in and out so that I can choose what goes into my final report. And I want to show you one more example of that. We're going to go back to our template, this one, actually. We're going to copy it. There we go. Copy that template. And we're going to run a similar example, but for this case, we're going to run a report for a more well-known threat group, in this case, Fin7. So I can update my title. I can change out my variable, add Fin7, save that off, close. And now I can refresh my queries. Again, you can see the data getting populated. This will take a tad longer to run just because we have more data on Fin7 than we do on Sparkling Goblin. But you can see our little spinnies showing that Synapse is working for us. And now we're starting to see that data come back. So here, Synapse has written a different sentence for me for this threat group. Fin7 is a financially motivated group. They've operated since at least 2015. You'll notice the country data was automatically left out because we don't have a country of origin assigned for this group. So in constructing that sentence, Synapse knows to leave that bit out. We have our summary data, including a number of indicators. So we have more data on Fin7 than we did for Sparkling Goblin. And again, I can go through and see which elements have been populated and which ones I want to retain for my report and which ones I might want to exclude. So I'll flip back and show you my finalized, prettied up Fin7 report. So some of the layout is similar here, taking a second to populate. Great. So while that is refreshing, we've got the additional information about Fin7. We've added a force graph view of the indicators associated with that group. In this case, we do have MITRE data. So we've populated the aliases that we know for this group, not just from public reporting, but from MITRE's attack matrix as well. We've added the software that they use, both from public reporting and from MITRE. Scrolling down, we've added more indicators about their IP addresses broken down by ASN and location. And we have information about their malware. So we have added data about the types of files that they use broken out by MIME type. So we see a lot of RTF documents that get sent out by this group, a lot of PE executables that their malware gets dropped. We've set up a chart automatically for their binary compile times, showing the days of the week. They tend to work Tuesday through Saturday, which is kind of interesting, as well as a malware timeline of when we've seen their malware overall, with the earliest compile date being August 2014, the most recent one that we have loaded into Synapse for this purposes, October of 2017. So again, these are sort of plug and play. You can add and remove the elements as you see fit and as is appropriate for your reporting. But the nice thing about this is a report like that would potentially take hours or weeks to pull together, you can populate automatically. So instead of spending your time researching that data and digging all that information up, you can automatically pull in your current data set from Synapse directly. And then instead of spending your time doing the research, you can spend your time fine-tuning what you want to report out. Maybe you need to do a little bit of research to pull things up to date, but the information is right there and it's instantly populatable. Another nice use for that, it doesn't have to be formalized reporting. Let's say that you're a SOC analyst and you're triaging alerts, and you see an alert that indicates that the activity might be associated with a particular threat group or might be associated with a particular malware family. And you need to know, for purposes of triage, right away, what's everything you can tell me about this group? What's everything you can tell me about this malware family? I can run those queries using Storm if I'm familiar with the query language and I know the questions that I want to ask. But isn't it easier if I have that template ready for me and I can simply plug in a threat group name or a malware family name and use that template to instantly run 15 or 20 queries, populate those story elements, and give me the data that I need in a much faster, more efficient manner to let me get back to the work of triaging that alert. So a lot of different use cases for templates. These are a few examples that we've given you, but anything that you report on a regular basis, maybe it's a report on vulnerabilities. If you're doing managed services or you have externally facing customers, maybe you want to do summary reports for your customers. What activity have we seen on their behalf in the past 30 days, for example? Lots of different use cases for this. So we hope that you find this exciting and useful and are thinking about ways that you might leverage this within your organization. To kind of wrap up, want to mention again that if you missed our original webinar on stories in general, you can watch that on video. We've recorded that for you, so you can go to that link and learn more about stories in general. If you're interested in learning more about Synapse, our next Synapse 101 will be on November 16th. We'd encourage you to sign up to attend that. And if you do attend, you will gain access to your own demo instance of Synapse so that you can learn about it and try it out for yourself. And with that, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully this has been useful and educational.